work our way into the senior gilt division, and heat number one, and I think for me, I think the top end probably brings the most discussion to the table. Just going to kind of talk about the two gilts. We talk about entry number 6, the all-black gilt. Really long-made, long-bodied kind of a female that's really long in terms of her skeleton. You start studying this gilt from the side. I think she's got good length and extension ahead of her blade. She's an extremely nicely balanced gilt. I think for me, you study the gilt coming right at you. You study her leaving you. Maybe a gilt that wants to close up too much at the ground and consequently at her hock. Maybe a gilt that wants to just get a little narrow and flat when you study her in terms of the base of her ham. On the other side of the spectrum, we talk about the number 3 gilt. Love this gilt's stoutness. She's got a lot of power, a lot of muscle, a gilt that's got some shape. She's really deep-bodied. She's probably the shorter-bodied gilt of the pair. You study her up high. She's got some width over her blade. She's got some stoutness to her mug. I think a gilt that's really comfortable out here on the grass. Now, there is concerns for me on this female, and just kind of like we talked about the all-black gilt is you got to study her in terms of the angulation up front, in terms of the length when you study her ahead of her blade. As you watch that gilt turn and go, she maybe wants to play just a little bit in terms of her hock, maybe where she wants to set it and be more comfortable. But I think out of the pair, for me, I'm going to ride them. Entry number 6 is going to win. Entry number 3 is going to be second. We're going to follow up with entry number 5. It's going to be third in this class. And I think a gilt that maybe gave me a little bit of struggle at first. I mean, you throw her in the mix and there's maybe not a whole lot of things wrong with her. But I think you just start studying the female and just start breaking her down. She's shorter face. She's shorter snouted. Maybe a gilt that we need to bring her up in terms of her pin set, level her out from there. But after that, I mean, she brings some maternal traits to the table. She's big, she's soft, she's pliable through the center portion of her body. I think she's really balanced in terms of her underline underneath. Maybe a gilt that, yeah, we could probably fix her right behind her blades. She wants to deviate right there, wants to play out a little bit right behind her blades. I think we bring some muscle there. We can level that out. Maybe she can push them top 2 just right ahead of her. And then we're going to round out the class with entry number 4. And maybe a gilt that just gives up some power. She gives up some growth. For me, she's a little bit more moderate made kind of a female. She's a little lighter in terms of her bone work. She's a little smaller in terms of her foot. Need to open her up there for her to work any higher. Good class of gilts. My compliments to these exhibitors. Heat number 2 of the senior gilt class. Entry number 8 is going to win this class. Really nice, functional female. Just a brood, just a brood sow, in my opinion. I think a gilt that's soft-bodied. Her balances extremely well. She's got some muscle. She's got some stoutness, a feature. Just a really nice, complete, well-rounded gilt to go ahead and win this class. We're going to follow up with entry number 9. It's going to be second in this class. Like I said before, when we've seen this gilt before, really well presented, really nice skin and hair on this gilt. I think you start breaking her down. I think another gilt that balances up extremely well. I think she's square, she's level in terms of right behind her blades. Maybe for me, we need to fix her out of her hip and her hind leg. I like to see her just be a little bit more comfortable. I like to bring her up in terms of her pin set. For me, give her a shot more and lower her stifle. And I know I don't like to talk a whole lot of stifle and muscle and gilts, but we're still generating these things. I still think they got to have some muscle. They got to have some stifle. That's why I go ahead and put this gilt in second. Third is going to be entry number 7. Another gilt. I really appreciate this gilt's stoutness of forearm and feature. Maybe for me, she's got just a shot more fullness upper rib. But I think when you study her to the base of her chest and the base of her cavity, she wants to concave right there in terms of her full rib. We need to open her up. Just give her a shot more spring of rib for her to move any higher. But still, I think a gilt that you can appreciate in terms of her muscle. You can appreciate just in terms of her functionality and her soundness. I just think she's a really well-rounded, really level kind of a back gilt. We just need to open her up right there in her full rib to see her move any higher. Entry number 10 is going to round out her class, and I think a gilt that you can appreciate for her height to shoulder. A gilt that's got some length and extension ahead of her neck, but after that, for me, folks, a gilt that gets way too straight in her pastern. She gets really long in terms of her cannon. I think a gilt that just gets outpowered in terms of muscle and center body and balance. I'd like to bring her up. I'd like to see her neck tie higher out of the top side of her shoulder. We need to bring her up in terms of her pin set, make her a little leveler out of her hip. Really good class. My compliments to these exhibitors. Senior Gilts, Heat 3. Entry number 12 is going to win the class. The red belt Gilt. I think different shapes and sizes in this class, but I just come back just the bigger body, bigger outline Gilt that's just got more muscle. I think she's level in terms of her top. When you study her from her blades back, she's the squarest in terms of her hip. I think she definitely carries that to the ground. She's super functional, stout and big in terms of her feature. Maybe like to bring her back and shorten her up in terms of her cannon bone and her pasterns, but still I think she's a big, functional, high-performing kind of a Gilt to win this particular class. Entry number 13 is going to go next. A really short, boxy, moderate kind of a Gilt. Extremely level in terms of her top. She's got some extension ahead of her blade. Maybe for me, we study her, wants to close up at the ground. When you study her coming right at you when she leaves you, maybe like to give her a shot more in terms lower stifle muscle for her to work up any higher. But still a really nice Gilt to go in second. Entry number 14 is going to come third, and I like this Gilt's color. I think she reads extremely well. I think a Gilt that's going to have some future. Yeah, she's not the biggest. She's not the stoutest in terms of her feature, but one that I still think is extremely functional in terms of her build. I think she utilizes her hip and her hind leg. I love this Gilt skull. It reads really long and fresh. For me, we study her at the top side of her skeleton. I need to bury her chine down in her skeleton ever so slightly. Need to open her up right there at the base of her chest floor. Like to open her up in terms of her forerib and back into her hind legs. Entry number 11 is going to go fourth in this class. Maybe you'd like to see this Gilt a little bit closer in terms of the camera angle. Stays a little farther away, a little harder for me to see, but I think a Gilt that is going to be a really nice project for the young man. She's soft-bodied, she's deep-bodied. Just for me, she's just short. She's short-faced, she's short in terms of the length of her neck forward. She's short in terms of her hip. So, really good class. My congratulations to these exhibitors. Heat 4 of the senior Gilt division, and just for me, 15 needs to win, plain and simple. I think a Gilt that is extremely big. She's opened up, she's broody, she's maternal through the center portion of her body. I mean, the Gilt just has got sheer pounds over the two that over her two contemporaries. I think a Gilt that's just functional, really just good, complete kind of a female. Entry number 17 is going to follow up in second. I like this Gilt's just moderate body shape. She's a little shorter made kind of a female. Gilt that's still big in terms of her arms. She's still big in terms of her foot size. Gilt's that's got some muscle. She's a little leveler in terms of her top and her hip than when compared to our third place entry. For me, need to stouten her up at the ground. Maybe stouten her up in terms of her forearm for her to work any higher. Entry number 16 is going to round out the class. A Gilt that honestly, it's kind of hard to see in terms of the video. I don't know if it's the definition or maybe the camera angles on some of them. But I think when she gets right up to the video camera is when you get your best look. Round ribs, square-bodied kind of a Gilt. For me, just gives up too much power, just too much muscle, longer pastern kind of a Gilt. Good class. My congratulations to these exhibitors. We get out here for our senior Gilt drive, and I think there's two Gilts that surface, and I think there's one for me that goes third. Entry number 8 is going to be our grand champion senior Gilt, and I just think a Gilt that reads like she's going to have a really lucrative life in terms of being a sow. I mean, she's made right. Her angles are good. She's really soft and maternal about the center portion of her body. She's a deep body Gilt that's got adequate amount of width. She's still stout enough in terms of her bone work. I like the shape to her head and her skull. I think a Gilt that's going to make a really, really nice a sow when she gets there. Reserve is going to be entry number 12, and I think a Gilt that is made kind of like our grand champion. I think a longer made individual. She's smoother shouldered. She's big in terms of her forearm. Maybe for me, she's a little bit longer pastern than ideal. I'd like to bring her up, make her stronger in terms of her pasterns as she turns and goes. I'd like to make her just a little square in terms of her hocks, maybe as she hits the surface. Entry number 6 is going to be third overall. I think the black gilt reads really long made. She's a long spine kind of a female. I really like her smoothness, her shoulder, her design, her look from the side. I think she's probably the most extended gilt when you study her and in terms of her front 1/3. I think for me, where this gilt goes in third and third overall is just when this gilt turns and goes. Maybe like to make her a shot square from behind, study her in terms of her pin set and down to the ground. I think she wants to close up at her hock, wants to get the narrowest when she hits the surface. My congratulations to these exhibitors.